Logan, always a pleasure to bring you on, but I did have to tell you, okay, so this is going to be another two-parter, and we're going to talk about team stuff first, and we'll talk about the draft in the second episode, and your mock draft that you had that is now out, and people can go and they can rip you for it because it's like, what are you thinking here? That's what's supposed to happen with mocks, right? That's just part of the territory. But I always know it's informed one. But in Googling, I wanted to find out about your draft experience. So what it led me to is going back even further, your induction into the Chaminade High School Hall of Fame, where you were in high school, where I found out that you were a star soccer player.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was a star soccer player. I had a scholarship to play soccer at like a local college out there, but I already committed to UCLA. I also ran track. I ran like the 300 hurdles, the 4x4, and the 110 hurdles, and I was pretty competitive at the 300 hurdles. My 4x4 splits were like in the 50-second range, which is solid for high school. Like I used to be, I think people see me now and they're like, oh man, you're just kind of this big, gorilla. And, I used to have some athleticism to me back in the day. But not quite so much anymore. So
with the soccer though, you had that's a competitive area too. Like you had to have been pretty good. Why was that a serious thing? Like, did you seriously consider going that route or?
Yeah, I did. Like when I got into high school, like I was a soccer player first and I didn't know anything about football. I'd never played tackle football. And my dad honestly had signed me up so I would have friends when I went into high school because he thought it was like a more normal kind of high school sport. And so, I did the football thing and I wasn't very good at it. I didn't really understand the physicality element of it, but I think the soccer was really beneficial for me in terms of understanding space, and understanding zones and understanding angles. Cause a lot of kids had a really hard time, especially in high school sports, of understanding pursuit angles. And that was all stuff that came very natural to me. And then sitting in zones, that's a big part of soccer. And and as I got bigger and stronger, my production got better on football. And I don't want to say I grew out of soccer because I think my senior year, I was about 215, 220 pounds, 6'4", 6'5"-ish. So I could have played soccer, but definitely my body was kind of transitioning more into that kind of more robust physical sport of football.
See, I can just picture you now just running through these little tiny soccer players. You must have had because, obviously soccer players are kind of known for their flops. You must have caused a lot of flops.
Yeah, my dad grew up playing hockey and played hockey in college at MIT and then BU. So, very physical sport hockey. And he played back in the day with no helmets and no mouth guards and, that kind of stuff. And so he was very adamant to me about, make sure if I ever see you flop, we're going to take you out of the sport. And and so I never flopped, but I was a big kid and guys would come barreling into me and they'd fall down and I'd get the yellow and it was this big thing and all the parents on the sideline would talk in hushed whispers when I'd come on the field because everyone thought I was a goon, and I wasn't the most skilled soccer player, but I was very physical and I was big and I could run and I was very well conditioned and just lended itself to me being very productive at the high school level in soccer.
So, and this is a little transition to Sammis Reyes.
Yep.
Because you talk about understanding angles and zones and all that. He obviously was a basketball player. I know you transition at a different level, but there's got to be an understanding first to allow you to transition whatever level. Did your experience, because you've worked with him, would you talk to him about angles and zones and maybe translating from one sport to another and how to translate that?
You're always trying to draw connections and parallels because you're trying to just find ways to speak the same language. I lived with a guy when I was in Atlanta on the team there who played rugby, so you're always trying to kind of verbalize some connection to something that they know. And it makes it easier when the sport has some type of connection. Everyone thinks, rugby and, football are very similar, but they're actually very dissimilar. Rugby is probably more similar to soccer, so with basketball, there are some similarities in terms of how you want to, kind of protect the ball, attack the ball with your hands. You do box out, you have different ways of playing defense. And I find that defense, when talking basketball specifically, translates really well to football, even in blocking, because you understand how thick you need to be on the man, in terms of playing defense. You can't be kind of on a half a man. And it's the same thing with blocking. You got to kind of take a full big chunk of the guy. Your screws have to be on his screws. And I find that stuff is helpful to kind of internalize just position. And obviously you need to get into the more technical nuance of hand placement, foot placement, how to generate power from the ground, all those things. But as long as you have some kind of starting point from your other sport, at a high level, you play basketball at a very high level in Chile. and he played college basketball here. Like that is at least it helps kind of move the process along.
Have you seen, could you see him understanding some of the what you're trying to get across just because you could translate like that, or he could?
Yeah, absolutely. And he, obviously like a lot of credit has to go to him because these guys are tremendous athletes, and they're tremendous athletes for a reason. And they're kinesthetic learners. Usually they learn in a very physical way. So the more time he would spend with the task and the more times we would communicate, it just, when you're coaching good athletes, they pick up stuff very quickly. I coach high school football. I do a lot of personal training, and the more athletic the kid, the easier those adaptations come. And so Sammis is one of the best athletes in the entire world. And so obviously like that transition is not super overwhelming for him.
They obviously could use another tight end here. Where do you think he can develop? Like, how much more can he develop this year as far as like taking a step to get to where he could be a reliable third? Or do you still look at him and say, it's going to take another year or so because it is really, really, really hard?
Yeah, so I think the thing with him, and I think you said like reliable third, I think he's in that role right now. I think you have a third guy who can block well. And I thought his transition would go pass game to run game, but it's kind of gone the other way. It's gone run game to pass game. And so I think as he gets more comfortable with pass concepts and understanding, I think he's going to be more productive in the pass game. But I think he's shown a really nice physicality. And I think that's really hard to teach. And I think as long as he has a coach that can kind of push him technically, he's going to develop really quickly. Because if you watch him from preseason game 1 of last year to the last game of him on the team, like at least he looks like he knows what's going on. And that's a huge element. He's going to have this whole offseason to get better. I think he can be, he's not going to be like the best tight end in the NFL or anything like that, but he's going to be a guy who can contribute on special teams, contribute in specific situations, and kind of flush out a role like at a high level. And it's always nice to have a guy with that athletic surplus in one of those backup roles, you know what I mean? Because he's just going to grow and get better. And it's nice because he's not kind of redshirting this year. He's going to be able to contribute while he's still growing at the position.
Well, he also had, there were a couple of plays he had on special teams late in the year where I just remember him drilling somebody along the sidelines. How much, like when a guy's trying to get comfortable, how much can that experience just on special teams help him gain a different comfort level that can translate then to offense eventually?
Yeah, I think special teams is a funny spot because it takes the most probably physical courage, but the least like intellectual aptitude. And so what I mean by that, it's like an area where you're just big, strong, and fast. And if you're not afraid to hit somebody, you're going to be successful. And so you're stripping back kind of all the raw technique that's required to play football at a high level and saying, hey, block this person, go cover this kick, or just run down, defeat this block. And that's just being an athlete, that's being big, that's being physical. So it kind of lets them play in these like very high velocity situations, these high intensity situations. And I think they kind of say like, it's not too physical for me. I can do these plays, I can contribute here. And I think that's all very important for the development of an athlete in terms of confidence and kind of knowing that you can play at a high level. Like when I was a rookie here, I played a lot on punt return and punt and all these different special teams. And it just gets you in the game a little bit more, right? You kind of hear the calls, you understand the speed with which guys are playing. I think that's a big element. Special teams tends to be a little bit more ticked up in terms of speed of play. And so when you're out there and then you get on offense or defense, you're like, oh, this is a little bit more tempered. It's slightly different, but it's a little bit different. And so just getting exposed to that speed and getting comfortable at that speed, it helps you digest and helps you develop more confidence on offense or defense, whatever you're doing. And
I know they're hoping that it translates for De'Ami Brown too, because he did some gunner stuff. In your experience with the receivers, would it be the same for him or different? Or, I know there's always talking about getting off the line and you have to be more physical, but it did seem like he developed a little more physically playing that role.
I think, for me, one of my big points, you mentioned the mock draft, one of my big points of evaluation in the receivers is, do they play special teams and what do they do on special teams? Because usually receivers are kind of, this is a big generalization because there's obviously exception to every single rule, but they're kind of prima donnas. They're not super tough. They're not super physical. And one of the things about transitioning the NFL, it's one of the reasons like I'm kind of down on Chris Olave as I wonder about his physicality, is that everyone's very physical at the NFL level. So for De'Ami to go out and play gunner for an NFL team, go against those double teams, go against those double vices where you just have to literally kind of fight for your life. If you've never seen a vicious vice on a gunner, like you have not seen like what the NFL is about. Those guys are ruthless out there. And so when you get a guy who has the physical traits to get it done and also the physical courage to get it done, I think that lends itself to a guy who can be a pretty solid football player offensively. And I think it kind of conditions them to the physical elements of playing offense in the NFL against these high-level cornerbacks. So I do think, Ron has mentioned that a whole bunch of times. Everyone in the building mentions how he performed on special teams, and I understand why that's important in terms of development. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to be the number 2 this year,
right,
but it means he's going to be a guy who can contribute to this team, whether it's the 3, the 4, guy with some special teams ability and a guy with a nice physicality. And that's a big deal from a 3rd-round pick who took a little bit of time to get going last year.
Definitely took some time. And I think there's some things that there's my phone. I think there's some things he can do. He can certainly help a lot more than he did last year. Looking at, like, they obviously reported to practice or workouts this week. I keep saying workouts this week. How big a deal is it that Chase, there was a lot of talk about Chase Young not being there last year. How big a deal is it for him to be there?
I think it's a huge deal. I mean, I'm old school in this regard. Like, I was a guy, and you know this, John, like I never missed anything. I never had the luxury of missing anything. And there are guys who have the luxury. I think we talked about DeSean Jackson before the show started and how, certain guys can miss and they're okay. But, in terms of like getting comfortable with the scheme, like this is part of that kind of integration process into the offense, right? They're going to start reviewing clips. They're going to start reviewing techniques. They'll review some film from last year. It is a workout session, but they do have like an hour and a half of meetings. And so in those meetings, like that's time where you kind of reacclimate yourself with the verbiage of the offense, the different techniques coaches wants, the language the defense or the offense is communicating in. And it's this nice kind of integration period into the stuff, which is phase 2 next week, where you get on the field for individual work. And then phase 3, which is more practice-based stuff. And then in the practice-based stuff, I think that's extremely advantageous because you're seeing NFL rushers. Like when I train NFL defensive ends, I'm out there trying to give them pass rush looks. It's much more advantageous for them to put a helmet on, put the shoulder pads on, do some one-on-ones, do some reps, feel the length, feel the physicality of those players, even if it's at 80%, just to kind of get themselves ready for training camp. So again, like I'm old school in that regard, but I do think you're never going to get better practice than going against NFL talent. And so phase 3, I think that's a big deal, but also just hearing the language at a bare minimum. And then not to mention his rehab, being involved with the team, being around the team for the rehab process. They know where he's at. They know what he's capable of. They're not going to rush him back as if, like sometimes when they're at outside facilities, these guys, the communication gets a little bit dicey and they don't know where the player's at. Here, they know exactly what's going on. They can handle his rehab better. And I just think it's probably better for everybody.
And you brought up DeSean. Do guys care, or how much do guys care when others miss? And it doesn't depend on who it is and what they do on Sundays.
I think it like you said, it depends on the guy, right? There are certain guys, like DeSean's a perfect example. Like he would never come to OTAs, anything that was non-mandatory. But when he came here, he never made any mental mistakes, and he was always kind of that home run, big play threat. And so as much as it kind of got in my craw as a player, like a guy, I had to do everything to be in the NFL. Like I understood that his physical talent allowed him to do things that I could not get away with, right? And if DeSean came in and was like messing stuff up, running the wrong route, not in good shape, kind of nursing an injury or something, I think that would be more concerning. But he always came in ready to go. And when you have that level of talent and that level of kind of, clout within the organization, I think that's okay. And I know a lot of people, a lot of fans don't understand that, but in the context of an NFL locker room, I think that is something that culturally is kind of locker room dependent and guy dependent. And, Shannon Sharp Mike Shannon used to say this all the time. Shannon Sharp never went to OTAs, but he was always in perfect shape and he knew the offense when it came time to execute. So as long as you do those things and as long as you're ready to perform, like performance is the ultimate judge, and people need different things to perform. And if they don't need that and they're performing at a high level, I understand that.
With DeSean kind of defined the word chill, don't you think?
It's interesting with DeSean though. Like I had a conversation with coaches, when he was here, and I was always kind of like, man, DeSean this, DeSean that, because we're very different in terms of our approach and preparation. And I had a coach tell me that, DeSean, if DeSean like would pretend to sleep in meetings or whatever, but he would say like, DeSean never gets a question wrong when you ask him. He never has a misalignment or misassignment. So I don't know if he just wanted to kind of purvey this kind of chill or relax. Or
I think he likes to give off that kind of demeanor and attitude.
Aloof demeanor, but like for all of his stuff, like he wouldn't be in the NFL if he wasn't an outstanding pro on the field and in practice, in games. he understood what was happening, and he understood his opponent, and he did some type of preparation. I don't know what it was. It wasn't the same as my preparation, but it got him ready to go. And so I think that's something to consider when kind of referencing DeSean.
Well, he was one of my favorites to talk to, because I always felt like I think he's a smart guy.
Right.
And I know that I know what he would do, and I know that he would produce. And that's what you'd always hear. Well, he knows the offense and he doesn't make the mistakes. So what are you going to say? He comes in prepared. But I always enjoyed dealing with DeSean. I got a kick out of him. So I enjoy that. But the other guy, speaking of going with receivers, Terry McLaurin, who we know he wants he's going to get an extension at some point, or whatever happens. But I would be shocked if he doesn't get one here.
Yeah.
Been shocked before, but he's showing up despite despite wanting that. Not going to participate on the field in those practices, but he'll be here. What does that mean?
So I appreciate that. He's in a tough situation with the team, and obviously people have different perspectives within the organization, I'm sure. And Terry has different perspective on how he should be treated in this situation. But I think that's a sign of a true professional, right? You're not getting exactly what you want from a financial standpoint. I think everyone in the building knows he deserves to be compensated. It's just about the level with which he should be compensated. And as a player and as a teammate, and seeing a captain who is going through this difficult kind of professional element of your career, for him to come and kind of show me that he's ready to go, that he's going to be in meetings. And to me, that's the most important part. Like, I know Terry's going to be in shape, but to be in meetings, to be studying, to be prepping, I respect the heck out of that, and I think a lot of guys in the locker room will too. I think, maybe some of the young guys won't understand the financial element, but definitely the kind of meat of that locker room will understand that he's actually going above and beyond. He's here when he doesn't have to be. He's kind of showing his displeasure by not participating in a non-mandatory event, but he's here. But he's here supporting us, participating in the classroom stuff, which is very important.
Obviously, you guys understand the business of football, but you got a guy like that on your roster. How important is it to keep that guy, knowing how others might perceive him? And and just like, how much do other guys pay attention to? Are they going to take care of Terry or not?
Well, I think the thing interesting with Terry, and I've talked to you about this before, is like, I don't know if he's like, I'm probably gonna get roasted for this, but I don't know if he's like a top 10 or top 15 receiver. He's a very, very good football player. But I think the thing that really adds his value is the cultural fit here. I think he's a guy who is the truest understanding of what it means to be a professional, right? I've never heard one criticism levied against Terry. He just goes in and does his work. And that to me has value. And as a player who's played with guys like that, that has value. And I want to see guys like that rewarded, because and if I'm Ron, or if I'm the leadership of the Commanders organization, like, I want to reward that, because I want other players to look and say, oh, if I handle myself like Terry, I will also get rewarded. And, Terry has tremendous on-field production to support that as well. And that's why he should get paid. But I just think like there's a leadership culture element that Terry brings that is very, very valuable. And that's why, I would say kind of fight to keep him here. Obviously, if he wants to be the highest paid receiver in the NFL, like, no, that's just not reasonable. I don't think he wants that, from what I understand.
Yeah, I don't think he would. I don't think that's not what I've heard.
And so I'm not saying that, but, obviously, like, I think he should be compensated. And it's just about the value of that kind of extracurricular element, that non-concrete measurable, and what that means to the team. I think it's very valuable, especially with a guy who's had the production he's had. But we'll see what happens.
How much can a guy like that, how much will he help Carson Wentz, just because of, not just that he's a good receiver, but because of his approach as well?
Yeah, I think it's always nice, especially for quarterbacks, to have guys that you trust. Like, I just think back to the guys that were really good pros, say what you want about Jay Cutler, say what you want about Matt Ryan. They were guys who were good professionals. Deshaun Watson, again, lots of legal stuff there. But one of the things they valued most in their receivers was not the biggest, strongest, fastest playmaker. They valued trust, right? And one thing about Terry, when you watch him, is that you can trust him. You know that he's going to run the route the way it's supposed to be run. And that's something that quarterbacks value. They want to know where the player's going to be in the position he's going to be in. And I remember Matt Ryan like going nuts with guys, young guys, saying like, if I can't trust you, I will tell them to cut you from the team, and like, that's a very impactful statement. I remember Jay Cutler yelling at the receivers in Chicago when I was there, because they weren't being very disciplined with their route stuff. They didn't know what to do. And I don't think any of those issues are there with Terry, and it just allows you to settle in and be confident. I think Carson Wentz, his relationship with Michael Pittman was well documented, and the trust level he had and how he'd always go to him. But that's because he knows and he believes in him. It's the same thing with Tom Brady. They all have their favorites, and it's not necessarily the most dynamic guy. It's the guy they trust. Aaron Rodgers and Alan Lazard, I think, is a fantastic example, right? He's always fighting for Alan Lazard, and Alan Lazard is not, the best receiver in the NFL. He does the little things really well, but he's also where Aaron wants him to be, and Aaron trusts him. And so I think having a guy like that for Carson, just kind of in the building already, knows the offense, handles himself well, is going to work with Carson to get better. I think just allows Carson to be at his best, and that's what you want.
We'll get 1 or 2 more minutes here, then we'll on Carson. When you look at this receiving core, what do they need to add to make him more effective?
Yeah, I think when I look at Carson and his history, I think when he's got a lot of playmakers and guys who can catch the ball that is a little off target with outstanding hands, I think that's something that makes him better. And I look at like Alshon Jeffrey, for example, during his time in Philadelphia, kind of this big body, slower receiver who Drake London gets comped to quite a bit. Logan Thomas is another one, outstanding hands, nice big physical frame, who can catch like off frame targets. So like stuff that's not right down the middle, right? Guys who can kind of move their hands around and catch the football. I think having a guy like that here, Terry's got a little bit of that to his game, right? So that's always important. Finding a guy like that could support him, I think is great. And also finding guys who could just get open in a big way is huge for him. He just needs playmakers to elevate him. And I think finding somebody like with excellent hands, because he's not the most accurate dude in the world. And what I mean by that is like, he's going to throw it to you and you're going to know it's to you, but like, is it going to be 2 feet to your left, 2 feet to your right, a foot above your head? And Pittman did a great job of maximizing those touches when he was in Indianapolis. And other guys like T.Y. Hilton, for example, he's a great football player, obviously, but not known for being able to catch balls at high velocities outside of his frame. So finding guys that can support that skill set or that deficiency in Carson's game, I think would be really important.
Last thing for this, the offensive line.
Yep.
Where are they at with that? Do they have a starting right guard on this roster? Do they need to add that still?
Yeah, so I was listening to something, I think Daniel Jeremiah was doing a mock draft, and we were talking about the Washington football team, and he said something that I totally agree with. They are graded very well by PFF, but when you watch them, there are some kind of deficiencies in terms of movement and creating moving the line of scrimmage in a way that helps the running back. And I think finding some way to upgrade that group and finding guys who are physical up front is going to be really, really important because they do a lot of inside zone. They've said that they want to get to more outside zone game, which I think would be great for them, kind of diversify the profile. But last year they ran, I felt like it was 60-70% inside zone, and you need guys who are road graders and nasty, guys who are very technically sound. And so I think finding ways to upgrade that position, obviously Wes Schweitzer, that's in his DNA. What's his name? Norwell, the guy they just signed, is a little bit like that, very technical. I think he's going to upgrade just from like a tight zone run blocking standpoint. But I also think, if you got to move, like we've talked about this before, finding there's some massive human beings that play guard in this draft that can be really neat, really mean and upgrade this position. I think finding guys like that are going to be really, really beneficial. So yes, I think you need to upgrade the offensive line. I think you need to upgrade physicality. I think I need to upgrade just the mindset because of the style that they run. If they were running like a Kyle Shanahan offense, I'd say maybe not so much because you can kind of game plan around that group. But here they're demanding that those guys be very physical people movers, and that's difficult. So you need to make sure you got the horses up front to get that done.
Logan, you're the best. Thanks a lot, man.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Hey everybody, it's John Keim. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, and I'll continue to bring you guests who provide excellent insight into the Washington Commanders. And while you're here, check out the other terrific content on the Ampire Media Network, including Inside the Cap with Joel Corey and All's Caps with Steve Wino and former Washington Capital Carl Alsner. Go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Thank you.